Man, I wish I could play me. Man. I wish I could play music. I got this song by the Roots in my head. The hot music, the hot music, the hot. I was getting my hair done the other day, and I heard that joint. I was like, oh, that's right. That joint is on point. That beat is crazy. All right, let's talk about this on Friday. I've been doing sermon prep. I'm sabbatical officially ends on Sunday, so I'm doing sermon prep today. I just been thinking about this a lot. So let's have this conversation. All right. First things first. Welcome to CNN. I'm Kirk Kennedy. Let's go in. All right. Let's have this conversation. I feel like there's not enough good marriage videos out there. Let me tell you, I've been a pastor for 15 years and been in ministry for 20 plus years. I've done a ton of marriage counseling. Got to even apply it in my own life, right? Let me just be honest. Let's just be honest. People, especially Christians, will pretend like I don't know what it is. We're like all people, believers are infatuated with appearance, right? There are things look good, things look like we're okay, and then all of a sudden you hear the news like, wow, their marriage is really in trouble. And you're trying to figure out, man, how is their marriage really in trouble, right? You know, so let's talk about this for a second. Shouts to you, homeboy, catching me live. Let's get it, all right? Here's the problem. Let's talk about this, right? Marriage is a tough thing. It's a beautiful thing, but it's a tough thing. There's a reason why many people get divorced, particularly among believers. The people who are supposed to prize marriage. It just happens. It happens. We act like it's the greatest thing ever. Like the worst thing ever. And it is, but it happens, right, with people. But let's get into why this happens. I'm going to give you, as a marriage counselor for almost 2 decades, let me give you 3 reasons why spouses end up hating each other. All right. Now, these are, if you don't have to agree with these, you clicked on the video, which you should have. I'm not saying your marriage is bad. All marriages have troubles. My marriage has troubles. We get it, right? But let me give you 3 reasons why. This ain't gonna be a long video. It's Friday night, fam. I know I know what y'all doing. Y'all streaming live or whatever, watching a bunch of binge watching tonight. All right. Let me tell you 3 reasons from my experience in 15 years of counseling, having saved some marriages. And if you heard this project, there's a song called Divorce on this album where, you know, I couldn't save some marriages. All right. But this video isn't just for people who are married. It's for people who are considering it, because if you do get married, you're going to run across these things. All right. 3 reasons why spouses end up hating each other and then often getting a divorce. Reason number 1, surviving your spouse. All right, let me explain what I mean by this. If you're going through a tough time, or you know people who are going through a tough time and they're married, right? And you talk to them and say you're like, hey, how are things going? Most often, that person, that spouse, will tell you what the other spouse is doing to them. How I'm just sorry, man. I could use your prayer. I'm really struggling. Like, it's just so difficult. Like, he's just so this, or man, all she does is this, right? And that might be true to their experience. But people talk like you're surviving your spouse. Now, if you're not a believer, you may feel this way and you may disagree with what I'm saying. But if you're a believer, there's a different way you got to process this. Let me tell you why. Because when you say like, oh man, yeah, you might be right. They said this, we got in a conflict yesterday with it. And you almost sound like you're surviving your spouse. Like you're dealing with this terrible person. And don't get me wrong, there are some people who are terrible. And then you're thinking, man, should I even marry this person? But for the most part, you have a mentality that says, this is what this person is doing to me. Here's the problem with surviving your spouse. From the biblical perspective, even if your spouse picks a fight, If you sin back in response to God, you both are culpable, right? You're culpable. Jesus said stuff like, look, turn the other cheek. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2, right? Turn the other cheek. And I made a video a while ago about this. So I'm going to say this statement right now. The reason why this is important, because most people will say God hates divorce, right? But they say, when they say that, they mean God hates when you sign the paperwork and get divorced, which is true. But God also hates functional divorces, not just legal ones. So when you're functionally divorced, it doesn't glorify God. Do you know 1 out of 4 marriages are sexless? Oh, is God pleased by that? No. What happens is people are surviving their spouses in their minds. I'm dealing with what this person is doing to me, their sins against me. Rarely do people think, I also sin against them too, and I need to go after that because of what God says, right? Surviving your spouse is a wonderful strategy of the enemy. He makes you think your spouse's sins are more serious than yours, or that God is somehow on your side in your sinful response back to your spouse because they've sinned against you. That couldn't be further from the truth. Here's the reality. When I talk to couples who are struggling with each other, a lot of times people they want you as the counselor, me, to tell them who's right and who's wrong. But when you're in conflict with your spouse, unless there's a detail that's really important, it doesn't matter who's right or wrong. You're in this situation regardless. The question is, what did you contribute to the situation? I've told my wife plenty of times when we're in difficult situations, we got here together. Okay? I've never met a couple that one spouse is super godly and just always obeying the Lord, and the other one is just a jerk. Now, there are maturity issues, but to be honest, sometimes you may be godlier than your spouse, which is common, that one's going to be more mature than the other. But once you sin back against your spouse, you're culpable. You're not surviving your spouse. You're contributing with your spouse to the conflict in your marriage, to the sin in your marriage. And if more couples came to their situations, whether it's with a marriage counselor or on their own, and thought, okay, what do I need to change? What does God want me to change? Irrespective of whether they change or not, my spouse. What is God asking me to stop doing or start doing in light of what's happening? This doesn't happen that often. People get deceived into thinking that their spouse's sin is more important than their own and more significant than their own, and then they end up hating each other. But both people are contributing. All right, that's number one. Number two, and this rolls right into it. Here's what happens. Mosaic law marriages. All right. The Mosaic law was essentially, for most people, the Israelites in particular, was a set of laws that you earn your salvation. You earn your justification, right? So this is what was a big deal when Jesus came. Getting circumcised was like, hey, don't get circumcised. That was the old law. That was a Mosaic law. Like, you're saying that you can keep the whole law. And what we're saying is you cannot. So Jesus came so that you no longer try to keep the law. Only he can keep the law. This happens in marriages as well. And I get it because I've done this. My wife does it. I've done this. But here's what happens in Mosaic law marriages. You start making your spouse earn the things that God commands you to do. This happens a lot, especially so on women. This is what happens with women. I'm sorry, ladies. I'm just being honest. Go to 1 Corinthians 7 if you're mad at me. Verses 2 through 4. Women will make their husbands earn sex. Like, you have to earn it. If you don't treat them a certain way, then you got to earn it. And then husbands retaliate by making their wives earn like affection, earn gentleness. So husbands are mostly gentle, kind, and servant-hearted when they're feeling amorous. But then they're easily irritated or harsh with their wives. And this becomes a reality. You know what's interesting? And most people won't say what I'm about to say right now. And this is going to make a lot of the husbands mad, but I'm an equal opportunity offender. You know, I don't know how this happened, but There's in a lot of marriages, a lot of Christian marriages, husbands' minds, there's this idea that the wives submitting to the husbands is a greater command from God than husbands love your wives as Christ loves the church. I kid you not. You cannot make this stuff up. I sat with a guy who I felt like, no, it wasn't even I felt like it was objective. He was treating his wife like crap. I mean, he was just mocking her, all this stuff. I mean, he was just rude, arrogant, mean to her, right? And one day he said to me that it's my job as the pastor to tell her that she needs to submit to him, irrespective of what she does. And so I listened to him. He opened up Ephesians 5 and demanded that I read it. And I said, well, she's not a child. She doesn't submit to you like a child does a parent. But he wasn't having it. She needs to submit no matter what. And I just said, bro, if I do what you're asking me to do, then I have to also tell you that you have to love her as Christ loves the church. The command to submit for her is not greater than the command. Listen, wives are not told if you don't obey, your prayers won't be answered. You know who's told that? Husbands. Husbands are told in 1 Peter 3:7, live with your wives in an understanding way, show honor to women as a weaker vessel, since they are co-heirs of the grace of life with you, so that your prayers may not be hindered. Wives aren't, unless I'm missing a verse, wives are not told that. But husbands act like submission is a greater command. So I don't have to love her as Christ of the church, but she needs to submit. It's the same thing. I'm not going to tell anyone, well, you got to do this. Yeah, I'm going to say that, but then you also got to love your wife as Christ of the church. So what happens is you get these Mosaic law marriages where now, instead of obeying God because he said it, you make your spouse earn your obedience. They have to earn sex with you. They have to earn, and keep in mind, it's a command. Sex is a command in the Bible. It's a command in 1 Corinthians 7. You make your spouse earn affection. You make your spouse earn doing nice things for her, taking her out. You get these Mosaic law marriages, and it's about earning. It's not about grace anymore. It's about works. It's the Janet Jackson syndrome. For those of you old enough, what have you done for me lately? Y'all know about that. All right. Third thing, because I got to go. I got to take my son to the skating rink. He be roller skating. He be getting his thing on too, spinning around, all that. I'm going to give him my music. I'm going to be like, hey, listen, man. I come up here, we spend money, play 3 songs from this album. I'm trying to be the best YouTube pastor rapper because I believe I'm the best. That's not arrogant. That's honesty. I'm not arrogant. I'm accurate. I'm the best YouTube pastor rapper. All right, different video. Here's the third thing. Here's the third reason why spouses hate each other. Because spouses defend their sex. Let me explain. Oh, this is a big one. You're in your church and you're in a couples group, in a small group, right? And the wife, a couple is sharing, they're struggling, right? The wife will start talking about what her husband did that offended her. And all the other wives come to her defense. Yep, I can relate. I know I can relate, right? And they start listening. And then all of a sudden, the wives are they're defending the female. And then the husbands do the same thing. They share stuff. I'm like, man, who you telling? Man, my wife does the same thing. And what happens in these contexts where you're supposed to help each other, you end up defending the sins of the sex that you were assigned at birth. You end up defending what you relate to. That destroys a marriage. I tell you what, I remember years ago being in this couples group, and I used to hate going. And I'm not a big fear of man guy, right? I'm not a big, even though I'm over here looking like Sully from Monsters Inc. with these joints, right? I'm not a big fear of man guy, but I hated going to this group because no matter what happened, even if my wife came home with a loaded shotgun and shot at me, and if I sinned back against her, we're going to talk about my sin, not hers. I used to leave this meeting and be like, man, I hate this group. And all we talk about is everybody gangs up on the dudes. This and that. Then I've been in other groups where You're there to help each other, right? And then everyone takes offense, defends the sex that they are. The women defend the women. I can relate to that. The men be like, man, who you tell? That's not what's supposed to happen. Let me give you an idea. Here's a novel thought. Defend what God's word says, not what species you identify with. Listen, because this is what I remember one time telling this group, like, so let me ask you guys a question. Are you saying that my wife does not sin? She didn't sin in this situation. Okay. So are you saying that my sin is greater than? If my wife sinned, then why aren't you calling it out? You know, some of the best care that women can get is when other wives who are in the same position don't take their offense, don't take and acknowledge, hey, you were wrong. That was wrong. I sin like that too. That's wrong. You got to honor the Lord. What fruit of the Spirit do you need to put on to not be that way? Men need to do the same thing. Like, bro, you tripping, man. I know, I get it. You haven't had sex and you're frustrated, but man, you got to love the Lord. You got to honor the Lord and make that be what your motivation is. You got to love your wife as Christ. The Bible doesn't say love your wife as Christ loves the church when you have sex and she doesn't sin against you at all. That defeats the whole purpose of marriage. Like, defeats the whole reality. Like, we're going to sin against our spouses, our children, any interpersonal relationship. Doesn't matter. But the reality is how you handle that in a small group context could be the determining factor on if spouses hate each other. I remember spouses being in groups with spouses defended the sex, the women defended the women, the men, and then nothing happened. And the couple that needed help left more frustrated than before. Ladies, don't do that. Even if you can relate to what she's saying, if she's in sin in any way, whether she initiated or reciprocated, you got to call it out. Men, don't do that. You got to challenge your brother. Even if you feel like, I understand why you're saying what you're saying, you got to call it out. It's more serious than identifying with a personal struggle. It's the institution that God has created. Now, granted, you can do all these things and people still not work. It is what it is. Some people are not going to make it. There's no guarantees. We don't get married with guarantees. We get married with hope and with grace. And sometimes it doesn't work out. But these three things, surviving your spouse, focusing on what they've done, not what you've done, Mosaic law marriages, making your spouse earn the things that God says you're supposed to freely give, and defending your sex, women defending women, men defending men, it will be a frustrating time and you'll destroy yourselves in your marriages. I've been a marriage counselor for 20 years and I've seen some crazy stuff. And honestly, a lot of it isn't even that serious. You know what really happens is just you get to the point where you feel like I've reached my forgiveness threshold. That's what happens. I've reached my forgiveness and I've reached my obedience threshold. I no longer have to love you. I no longer have to forgive you. I can be bitter towards you because you've done. That's what happens in many marriages. And then they end up getting a divorce. Let me say this in case for the people in the back. Oh, my real loud people, throw your hands up. There is no threshold of forgiveness. There's no threshold. Because if you forgave your spouse, if God forgave you the way you forgave your spouse, yep, you probably be in hell. There's no threshold. I know it hurts. We offend each other. It's unfair sometimes. But we're not in the world of fairness. We're in the world of faithfulness. So, don't defend your sex. Go after Mosaic law marriages and stop surviving your spouse. In all honesty, you can honor the Lord even. Look, there are people who are prisoners of war in other countries. I read a story of a lady in China who was taken captive, a pastor's wife, thrown into a prison with no scriptures or nothing, somehow ended up getting a couple pages of a psalm and started a women's Bible ministry. You're not suffering that bad that you cannot glorify your God. But the minute you think you have, you're going to hate your spouse and your marriage is done. But what do I know? I'm just trying out this new camera and all of that. Got the Busta Rhyme joints right there and all of that. It's Friday, sermon prep. We back at it on Sunday. If you haven't got this album, if you haven't heard it, you do not know the Lord. You do not know the Lord if you haven't heard this. I'm the best pastor rapper on YouTube. Prove it. Money back guarantee. Money back guarantee. Get that album. Streaming everywhere. All right. Appreciate y'all. Now that I'm at 2,500, thank you. I said I'm going to step it up. When I get to 5K subscribers, we're going to step up the production. Right now, it's the camera, the lights, it's the action. All right. Appreciate y'all. We'll see you soon. Grace and peace.